Sometimes you shouldn't take names so seriously. Burger King has nothing to do with royalty, my online username is Pleasant Kenobi, and I often refuse to talk about Star Wars online, and anal tech has absolutely nothing to do with getting up the arm. However, Warhammer 40k has its origins in satire, parody, and the comic book style writing of the 80s and 90s, a level of on-the-nose absurdity and nonsense that I very much enjoy. Many of the Primarchs' names are painfully on the nose, with Ferrus Manus literally meaning iron hand in Latin, and Sanguinius being the leader of the literal blood-drinking psychic vampire lads. Blood Angels love blood play, and space wolves are cursed to sometimes accidentally transform into wolf people. Yes, Warhammer is often big, but it's not always clever, and sometimes it's fucking stupid, and I love it. The World Eaters, the 12th Legion, one of the larger factions within the marauding forces of the Chaos War Machine. They don't actually eat planets. Instead, they rage and they butcher. They metaphorically eat them, if you will. They are perhaps the most brutal and violent of the Chaos Space Marines, with a history of bloody conquest and violence. Their Primarch is Angron, whose name does sound a little bit like the word angry, because that's kind of his defining trait. And that's the extent of his baseline level of his character. Angron is one angry motherfucker. He is a raging demon dickhead now. However, there is some depth there. With the growth of the extended canon, the hundreds of novels and stories added via the Black Library, a lot of the rather simplistic concepts from the 80s and 90s that spawn these stupid names have been expanded upon to be far more interesting than they ever deserved to be. So even though the new model makes him look like an angry tomato, there's a bit more to him and the World Eaters. Let's cast our minds back though, and start with some history. The Emperor made 20 super enhanced gene warrior babies that were scattered to the winds and across the galaxy by the forces of chaos. He continued the Astartes project after they were gone, creating 20 armies of superpowered super soldiers, with each legion utilizing the genetic material of their gene father, of one of these Primarchs, of one of the 20 original. And 12 of these was the Warhound Legion. They were so brutal during their time as a fighting force during the Unification Wars, the Emperor stopped deploying them in the solar system, because they were just fucking killing everything. They were mad fighty cunts, and their brutality was looked at with suspicion by other legions and forces within the fledgling Imperium. Once Earth and the Sol system was unified through gunfire and fisticuffs, they looked to move throughout the galaxy. The Imperium expanded, planning to bring disparate human settlements that had been separated from one another in a previous time under one banner. They were looking to unify the forces of mankind. This sounds nice, but it was more colonial. It was violent, and with less consent than you might first think. The Emperor is, as a running through line for this story and many others, a bit of a bellend. The Warhounds were such a monstrous force that Big E decided to employ them to murder disloyal colonies and other rebellious factions during the Great Crusade. They were not utilised on worlds where the civilian population was needed or wanted to survive. There was no diplomacy. He knew how brutal and feral these mad bastards were. They were used as a tool, a weapon, a butcher's axe. That's foreshadowing. The Bloody 12th were never deployed for diplomacy or subtlety. The Astartes were already a destructive force that was frowned upon in some ways by the Imperium because of just how much they wrecked places when they went in ripping and tearing. But the Warhounds took it to an extreme. They ripped and tore better than any other, and even went as far as to use murder of allied Imperial forces to instill fear and to punish poor performance. They would just execute allied forces if they thought it would get the job done in the long run. They were pretty mad. Meanwhile, on Gladiator World, Luceria was a highly technologically advanced planet upon which Angron was found. Each of the Primarchs was, like I said, cast through the warp to the winds, and each of them arrived on a different planet that gave them a very different upbringing. It makes for fun little stories within the universe at least. He was enslaved and put to battle against other enhanced combatants for the fun and games of those in power, for the higher and upper classes. He attempted to escape many times and he failed because Angron, as a running thing, is one of the less successful of the Primarchs. He's very good at one thing, and that's just being angry. Like Magnus can turn himself into an ethereal messenger pigeon and surf the seas of the warp, and Kurz becomes literal Batman, but Angron struggles to break free of a Spartacus situation because he's a bit of a silly twat. He fights, he wins, and he fights some more, and he wins some more, and becomes a fan favourite. You see, Angron is a double-R bastard. What he lacks in strategy or street smarts or the ability to actually break out of a prison, for example, he makes up in raw physicality. If you think of the Primarchs as a team of superheroes, Angron is the Hulk. He's big, he's strong, and he's very fucking angry. Sanguinius and the Lion and Leman Russ are excellent single combatants through skill and talent, and Magnus is a powerful wizard who can bring down huge constructs with the power of his mind, and Vulcan is meant to be immensely strong, stronger than any of the other Primarchs by quite a large magnitude, but Angron is up there with them in terms of being a berserker who does not tire. He's unable to get tired, maybe physically stronger than all of them except Vulcan too. So whilst people are not fearful of him as a adversary and his armies and his forces, he is a one-on-one combatant that people should be scared of. But besides all this physicality and strength, prior to being surgically enhanced, he actually had the psychic ability to absorb pain and negative emotion, like an empathic leech or sponge, which hints at the tragedy of Angron being betrayed badly by his circumstances. The Angron that could have been, if things were slightly different, is interesting. The Lords of Nuceria experimented on him, trying to enhance an already incredibly potent super soldier, and they failed in every single way besides one: the implementation of an ancient technology called the Butcher's Nails. This is an implant that replaced part of his brain and pushed his rage and anger and upset to the extreme. Prior to the nails, he was perhaps more noble and willing to negotiate. He was a different person. The nails removed his empathy and his empathic abilities and his psychic abilities, and instead made him into a raging berserker. Eventually he escapes, taking the slaves and gladiators with him as an army force, but on their way to salvation and freedom, they're surrounded by enemy forces. 5 armies with weapons and guns and armour. The Emperor intervenes though. He shows up at this point. He's found Angron at just the right time, but he doesn't intervene in any way that's helpful. He simply says, do you want to join me? And Angron's like, who the fuck are you? Fuck off. No. I've just got away from one authority figure. I don't need another. He refuses. He wants to stay with the people that he cares about setting free, his fellow gladiators. And Big E then leaves. Prior to the epic confrontation that Angron is expecting, and the culmination of his entire life storyline, either the emancipation of his people or a warrior's death, the Emperor teleports him aboard a ship in orbit, stealing him away from the final plot point of his story, and doesn't bring any of his warriors with him. Angron is pretty fucking angry. He kills Custodes and Astartes around him. Like the absentee and terrible father that he is, the Emperor doesn't deal with the issue, and he assumes he'll come around later. There's quite a bit about the Emperor looking into the Butcher's Nails and finding out that parts of his brain have been removed and he can't fix it. There's so many threads on Reddit of people discussing, like, was this on purpose? Was it that he could fix the brain, but he couldn't fix the feelings of Angron, the bitterness and resentment for being abandoned? It's an interesting talking point. Over time, Angron actually goes on to kill most of the officers of the Warhounds that come to him. The only one that survived the confrontation with Angry Tomato Man is Khan, the one that we now know, who becomes the captain of the World Eaters when Angron finishes sulking and takes up the mantle of Death Cult Mass Murder Machine. Then Angron does what any loving father and considerate leader would do: increase the cross-brand synergy of his workforce by installing a contraption called the Butcher's Nails into every one of his workers. Take one for the team, everybody. It'll be fine. Tim from accounting, this will improve your productivity by 100%. They even had a little civil war over this, but eventually everyone who's left accepts the cyber rage braids and things get bad. The Legion's librarians find themselves melting and exploding as the Butcher's Nails are incompatible with that particular talent tree. Whoops. And furthermore, the effects vary on humans and Astartes who are not Primarchs, with some being in physical pain when they're not in direct combat, when not killing, driving them into real berserker rages. Naturally, this leads to the World Eaters just spiraling out of control and getting more and more brutal over the course of the Crusade. They get told to take the nails out by Grounded Emperor, but when they are sent to a northernmost regions of space for a murder holiday, Angron just says, fuck off, old man, and doesn't bother. When it comes to Horus doing a whole heresy, Angron needs zero convincing. He's so bitter and resentful towards the old man.
Son of a bitch, I'm in!
He tells Lehman in confidence that he could, if he could, take down the Emperor, seeing him as nothing more than a slaver similar to those that oppressed him on the planet in which he grew up. Angron is a bit of a tragic hero when you start reading about it. He's destined to be an empath who heals others, but thrust into a world of violence and never given any respite from said violence. He fought for the safety and freedom of those oppressed by the upper classes, which is a very admirable thing, a very admirable origin story, but was never allowed the cathartic climax by his father, who unplugged the internet before he could finish his Call of Duty match. Angron is angry, and he is bitter, and he is resentful of his father, and for good reason when you start to read about it. And it makes sense, because the Emperor could have saved his people, but instead told Angron that those people just didn't matter to him. The Emperor only cares about himself and his grand designs. Angron is in some ways a tragic representation of vengeance in the face of his environment serving him all the worst shit. So he jumps on board the heresy and joins in on the family fun with Fulgrim, Horus and Morty, and commits some pretty heinous war crimes on Istvan 5. Or was it 3? Is the drop site 5 and the virus bombs 3? Either way, a nice virus bombing. He eventually reaches Demonhood during a battle with Gulliman thanks to the interfering Lorgar. Angron has been missing from the canon of the game for a long time since. He had a model back in Epic, and then he was never a 40k model. Which is weird, because as the story developed and we start to see the Siege of Terror, the Word Bearers were the first to breach the walls during that siege. But ultimately, don't forget, that went bad for everyone. They lost huge casualties during the retreat, and during the scouring in which the Imperium hunted down the traitorous and the Chaos Space Marines and killed them, the Imperium ended up burning the Muster Worlds, and Angron's homeworld being exterminated by the good guys. And many a civilian died to remove any history of Angron's involvement in the Greater Imperium. The rage, the nails, the culture of brutal hand-to-hand combat and little strategy left the warband in tatters, showing up as a small contingent in wider Chaos Space Marine warbands until GW decided to finally give us a full codex, which is coming soon. And now Angry Tomato Man returns, looking more bloodthirsty than man. Across 30k and 40k, the World Eaters specialise in chain axe-based close-quarter murder. It's funny that both the Loyal and the Chaos Red Marines are the ones that get angry and rip and tear like a Doom Marine dressed up in ketchup cosplay. I used to joke that the Blood Angels are blood for the Blood God, but not that one, referring to the Primarch whose name is fucking Sanguinius. It's so on the nose. World Eaters focus on close combat and melee, looking to appease their god patron of Khorne, the actual Blood God. You may have heard the phrase blood for the Blood God and skulls for the Skull Throne. They do use guns, as that would be kind of silly not to, but they prefer the vroom vroom of a chain axe to pretty much the sound of anything else. With Khorne as their boss man, they have an obsession with the number 8, the colour red, brass nipple piercings and spikes, and a rejection of space magic. Khorne hates Psychers, which is actually super convenient because the Butcher's Nails cause World Eater Psychers to pop like a jalapeno popper left in the oven for too long. Ultimately, they're embodied by a red rampage of violence, skulls, brass spikes, and more violence, but behind it all is the conversation about nature versus nurture. All of the Gene Soldiers of the Astartes and the Chaos Astartes have this through line thematically. Not only are they gene crafted by a big golden cunt, but their origins come from a deal with the devil, literally. That the Emperor may have played a little too much with the ruinous powers before he understood what they were. He made deals with them when creating the warp entities that are the Primarchs, meaning all these Primarchs and their sons that were brought into being with a predisposition towards the results we got now. There's an argument that rebellion was inherent, that it was by design within them so they destroy themselves by the Emperor, or perhaps it was put there by the ruinous powers originally so that they would tear each other apart and destroy the Imperium, the one big threat to the great game. The Warhounds, even before finding Angron and being renamed, were brutal and chaotic, suggesting that they began life with their gene seed already corrupt with the things that would later manifest into the brutality that is the World Eaters. And Angron himself, given a different upbringing on a much nicer feudal farm world, might have been the counselor of the group, a gentle giant instead. What if he had crashed onto a planet where everyone just hangs out and talks about their feelings, instead of being forced to strangle men and rip their eyes out? Instead, he got needles to the brain and decades of hot, sweaty, half-naked gladiatorial combat. And whilst that might sound like a good time to some, it did turn him into a bit of a monster. I'm excited for the new model line, and I'll be listening to the Angron novel that I've basically cribbed notes from the wiki article of for this video whilst picking him up early next year when he releases. Thanks for watching the video. Please don't forget to subscribe, as it really helps me to grow this channel, separate to the normal Magic channel. This is the War Room, the Wargaming channel. And if you enjoyed the video, let me know in the comments below. And why not try this video on screen now, where we talk about why Horus did a heresy. Don't forget to smash that like button, and I'll see you all soon. Ta-ta for now.